Okay, what have we got today? There's been a bit of a delay because the next mission I wanted to do required several different things to come together. And it is a mission to rescue a Kerbal, which means going up into orbit and matching the orbit of the Kerbal, not just getting into the right plane, but actually matching the orbit itself, the object itself, so rendezvous. We needed not only to have a reasonable rendezvous, we needed to approach and hold steady close enough that I can jetpack from, the rescued vessel to the rescuing vessel. So, not having all sorts of interesting solvers on hand, I did it step by step. The basic mission plan, I'm going to go over this really super quick because I want to actually show the whole mission, and we'll come back to looking at the code. But what you're about to see is we're going to do a normal launch to a circular orbit. But before we do that, I've got a little pad hold thing which is going to have my vessel sit on the pad until I am under the plane of the target vessel. This is something we did for the satellite launches. We're going to use it here. Even though the Kerbal I'm rescuing is in almost purely equatorial orbit, he's off by a couple degrees, but I want this script to work no matter what the orbit is. So we're going to wait for him to be, we're going to wait for us to be underneath where we can launch up and be on the same orbital plane, and do the normal thing with get up into orbit and get circularized. We're using the same inclination matcher. It has been slightly modified. I'm always brushing up the code, refactoring, and improving. Then we go into trying to actually match orbits. So we're going to plan a maneuver node which will change our orbit from our starting ready orbit to the target orbit, and put it at a time when we're going to get there just as the target gets there. Now, there's many ways of doing this, and probably the easiest way would have been to hill climb it. I know that people have done that in the past. Here's Kevin, for instance, did a whole series of Kerbal Space Program exercises where he pretty much preferred to use hill climbing even when there were mathematical methods that would go directly to the solution, because frankly he wasn't trying to go deep into the math. Okay, at least that's what it seemed like to me. He got some good ways of heuristically doing something that worked, and he used it, and it worked great. It was understandable, and thumbs up to Kevin. I'm building on top of that. As we saw, I have the vis viva stuff locked in, so we can say if we know our periapsis and our apoapsis and our current radius, we can work out what our speed should be. So we can work it out for where we should be. We can work it out for what the orbit needs to be. That gives us our delta V, and we're good. But I'm going to merge that with Kevin's approach. I am going to plan a maneuver node for this transfer orbit. And then I am going to do a little bit of hill climbing to try to make it perfect. Now, the plan transfer is not going to use an actual hill climbing function. It's using a method I started working on before giving up and admitting I was just going to have to import Kevin's code and start from there. And yes, I did indeed end up importing Kevin's hill climbing code. We'll go over it in detail, but yeah, it's definitely his. Once you do this transfer goes 180 degrees around, which means if we were off by inclination much, we can't do anything about that because our ending position after 180 degree orbit is going to be along a line from the vessel through the middle of the body to where we're going to be. And if that doesn't line up with where the target could be, we're going to have an error. So we are going to plan a correction maneuver about halfway between We're going to use Kevin's hill climbing to kind of tweak this one little maneuver node to try to get as close as possible to the target vessel. We're going to do that. We're going to execute that node as carefully as we can, and then we're going to come screaming out of the stratosphere and rescue our hapless person, which will require waiting until we get near them, and then burning our engines to try to match their speed. We're going to come in at between 1 and 300 meters per second faster because we're coming down from higher orbit. So when we get to them, we have to circularize. That'll end up with us somewhere within anywhere from 100 meters to a kilometer. And then we have a fine grain approach and rescue. Basically, this says wherever we are, we're close enough that we can pretend that we are in a inertial coordinate system. We can ignore the fact that we're in a rotating frame. We can point ourselves at our target and we can move there slowly, and as long as the velocities and accelerations we are using dominate over the effects of it being a rotating coordinate frame, Newton's works. So our little rescue thing is going to get right up close, and we have a special pose we're going to put the spacecraft in to say we're ready to rescue. I am then going to have to do the rescue manually. I'm going to have to go switch to the other vessel and get the Kerbal out of it and have the Kerbal get on his jetpack and jet across, and that's all manual because you can't use KOS for Kerbal and EVA. Now, assuming I can actually do this EVA, which is probably going to be around 10 meters, it's really, really close. Our little air controller should be able to lock us in and get us really close and solidly just sitting there. Once we're done, I'll hit the abort button, and we will fall down into the normal deorbit and fall and decelerate and so on that we've done so many times before. In fact, in every flight that isn't a satellite, we've done that. So with that in mind, things have been tweaked so that this can be an entirely hands-off operation. I can start this up, and once I've hit the go button, once I have launched Valentina up to do this rescue mission, I will be hands-off until we are ready to use the jetpacks. So let's go pick up our spacecraft. And the spacecraft is Meaningfully Holistic Pickle. And this is a somewhat larger craft than we've used before. As I started looking at potential rescue missions and trying to remember how the missions may differ from each other, I thought, let's throw in a whole bunch of extra Delta V. So, what have we got here? PicJeb. Delta V stats. So this is our first spacecraft with 3 boosters, and it's heavy enough that the 3 boosters together still only get us a little over 1100 meters per second of Delta V. And the stack in the middle is going to be somewhere between 1580 and 1850 meters per second of Delta V. Between these, we ought to be able to get up to our parking orbit. Our parking orbit will be selected automatically. Our target is selected automatically. There's actually the scripting for Meaningfully Holistic Pickle /A01 actually has this information in it. We know who Donmund Kerman is, and we are going to be targeting him before we launch. And our launch will be predicated on what orbital plane he's in. We will be choosing an orbital altitude enough different from his that we don't have to wait forever to be able to do a transfer. And we'll find out what it selects when it gets there. I have forgotten what Donmund's orbit looks like. We'll find out when we get up there. I remember that it's fairly elliptical, fairly circular, and not too tall. So we'll probably come in above it. Make sure we've got... if we had just launched, we wouldn't have had a seat for Donmund, so we need to take those guys out. I am going to prefer to fly with Valentina. In fact, I'm going to prefer to work upwards from the bottom of the available crew, because when you forget, it'll use the guys at the top. and I don't want my top pilot, Jeb, to be the only one getting experience. I want to make sure it gets spread around. So when this is done, we'll start doing rescue missions. We'll kind of alternate them, rescue missions and tourist missions, so that the guy we rescue can go fly some tourists up. So we want to get our 1 star for everybody. We'll fly a few of those. We do have some things that are opened up. We ran a whole bunch of tourist missions, and we got enough money that we upgraded a bunch of things. So we've got custom actions and all of that stuff. We're still short on science, though. We're going to be limited by science. We need to do a whole bunch of science before we can get much bigger rockets. Anyway, Valentina, let's go back to this. Let's hit save just to have a snapshot of this. And here we are launching. And now I go hands off, except for the camera. I will move the camera around. So here's our first stage. Notice we're time warping. It has targeted Donmond, and we are waiting until we are underneath the plane of his orbit. And here we are. Pad hold is released, and we are counting down. And 2, 1. And I'm beginning to think I need to take some of the scripting I've done and start getting it out into the community more than just having it on my GitHub repo. We'll see about that. My staging script, for example, is it's a lot of years of refinement on what I had before, and then some you can do that kinds of things. It's not perfect, but it's not the old clunky way I used to do it, where I would examine the spacecraft part by part and produce a script. Now it's just this compact little bit of code that says, look at the engines, and if all of the engines that are that would be discarded by our next staging effect have flamed out, then we can discard it. I believe this makes some onion staging not work. For instance, if you have fuel tanks that are set up to stage and they don't have engines, I think it'll just get rid of the fuel tanks. So I may need to do some things if I do that. But if you do your onion staging where those tanks that you are jettisoning have engines attached to them, which I think is more common, it should work. We'll test that when we get there. So this is the launch. Here's the other script that I might want to have. My launch trajectories have just been really smooth. Let's take a look at the flight recorder. And I have a co-pilot. Fortunately, I'm not doing anything that I need hands for. Oops. She doesn't actually want to be picked up. I think she was looking for food. I will let her go get food. So if we take a look at our flight recorder, at our altitude on the flight recorder, that's just a very nice gradual curve. I don't know how close this is to a real gravity turn. I do know that if you want an absolutely minimal fuel gravity turn, that changes from rocket to rocket. But you'll notice we're just cracking the atmosphere. We are still thrusting. We're not yet at we don't yet have apoapsis at our target. This is a modification of my ascent script I was using. It used to be that our entire curve was based on your target altitude, and I've capped that. So I've said, if we're going farther than 80 kilometers up, our curve through the atmosphere should be just the same as if it was 80 kilometers. So this part of the curve should be pretty constant. And it looks like we selected a orbit at 250 kilometers. Well, that's cool. We are circularizing now. I can actually turn off the console. What other MechJeb things do I want to look at? Well, let's look at our target orbit information, which might come in handy. Oh, and you can automatically switch between map mode and flight mode. So I'm switching to the map mode camera here. In fact, let's center on Kerbin, like that. That way, when we start doing things for crazy, we won't be bobbing everything around. So our first step is to fix our inclination. And you see we're coming up on the ascending node of the target orbit with respect to ours. And you probably didn't hear it there. That was a little blip. And we have already planned our transfer orbit, which is going to be in an hour and a half. So we're going to warp there. And now we're warping. So our transfer orbit has the intersection mark. This all happens very fast because it's all automated. So we've automated, and KSP says we have an intersection. We are going to come within a kilometer at a relative speed of about 120 meters per second. So now we are executing the maneuver node. I also imported the maneuver node execution stuff from Kevin, but that required some modifications. And when we start talking about that, probably in a subsequent stream, I'll go over that in detail because they're not huge. His stuff works, but it's things that I wanted to do a little more mathematically exact in some cases. And I also wanted to invert the control structure. Most people will make methods that do things. You call them and they do something and they block. When they return, it's done. But I'm using a mission control system where I call a function and it looks at our current state and sets our control parameters and returns. So everything I do should be compute, commit, and return. Okay, so we have now fixed our inclination. Actually, we've now gotten onto our, oh my goodness, we're already there. There's Donman's capsule. While I was talking, we did a whole bunch of things. We executed the entry onto the transfer. We then planned a correction, and we executed the correction. And now we are closing in on Donmund. It's now a kilometer away, and there's our engine cranking up. So we figure out how much thrust we need to stop at Donmund, and I start doing things when I require half thrust. I want some margin. And we're not going to, this first burn, we're just burning purely prograde, so we're going to be on plane with him. Once we get there, we point at him, and we start closing in, so as we're getting closer. And then we spin it around so we can apply the brakes. And a little bit of error controller here to get us stopped within 10 meters-ish. Close to 10 meters. I'm not picky. And now we're in this upright pose that I'm using for the rescue. And the reason why I choose this is when you go EVA and you leave your capsule, this is the orientation your Kerbal is going to be in. And if you have it in a wildly different orientation, it can be kind of hard to get to the crew hatch. So let's switch over to Donmund. Poor Donmund. He's been sitting up here spinning. He's got no fuel. He's got no electricity. He's got no snacks. He's got nothing to drink. But he can go EVA. And he's spinning fast enough that I'm going to have to maneuver a bit to get back to the spacecraft. In fact, when I let go, it is very likely that the rescue ship will then maneuver to maintain its velocity with respect to the spacecraft. Now, I don't know if I can. Now, I can't use my jetpack to do anything here. So I'm just going to have to wait until I'm at a good spot. We're going to let go, turn on my jetpack, And I'm going to see if I can make my way to the capsule. And I tend to overcorrect, so pardon me if this is going to be B for board, except I have a hard time there. I am aboard. I'm not good at that bit. But we now see Valentina and Donmond are in the capsule. Whee! And they are ready to go home. We will take care of the space debris when we get back. The Space Center, we can have the Space Center cause it to go away. So how do we return home? Well, I have set up the abort so that wherever you are in your mission, when you say abort, it will return you to home. And if you're on orbit, it then goes through the normal stages of deorbiting you. It will take care of decelerating and popping the parachute and all of that. So all the old stages are still there. We've just made it so that all the current stages, if abort is turned on, will slide on through. So we hit that. And here we go to the deorbit. Now, I have been fairly liberal about setting up time warps. So you'll notice that we did a on-rails time warp until we hit atmosphere, and then we established a physics time warp at 4x for our entry. This craft is okay to run the physics at 4 times. Some crafts, when they get larger, they get unstable and they'll blow themselves apart if you try to run them too fast. This one, it depends on how it's feeling. Sometimes your heating will overheat one or more of the fins, but mostly it just works. See, we're getting warm there. So eventually we will have to go to the moon. Not too long from now, I think. I'm tempted to go to Minmus first. Just tempted. Although, when it comes down to it, where we go really should be controlled by the contracts that are available. YouTube is complaining about the primary and backup streams not being correctly configured. Odd. Anyway. So we've turned off warp because we are now heading down towards looking for a safe time to pop our parachutes. The auto stager should have discarded that stage. This is interesting. During testing, it was able to discard that stage. So, downside is we have extra mass coming in. I don't know whether there's enough extra drag from the engine, whether we're going to end up going faster or slower. Oh, that's not good. So our surface velocity is low enough. Yeah, I'll have to look at the stager and find out why it was not doing that. I actually modified the stager specifically so that we could discard the last engine when it didn't have, when that wouldn't discard the parachute. There's something to be said for not discarding things if discarding them wouldn't have a benefit. But again, coming down like this, maybe it's the descent script that needs to look at it and say, gosh, we're coming in on our final descent. We need to get rid of all the stages except for the stage with the parachutes. Maybe that is something that the mission itself does, and the auto stager should then only stage if there's a benefit doing so, like you're staging so you can uncover and ignite an engine that's not currently in use. Too bad. Auto stager is fairly simple. So I'm going to go back to 4x time so we can finish this up. There we go. And I am pretty sure that we won't get any science from the crew report. Nope. Valentina can go EVA and do an EVA report. No science from that. And for some reason, if you're not positioned exactly right, you can't use B to get back in until you climb up a little bit. But I do want to recover them all at once. There we go. And there is our completed mission. And we've got no science to speak of. We got some parts refunded. We got Donmund came back, and Donmund has advanced to level 1. So Donmund got 2 experience points during the rescue. Now, I thought you didn't get experience until after you got him safely rescued, and then he got enrolled into the program. So it looks like these guys we rescue are going to be 1-star pilots. Yay! Total reputation 696. So if we need to cancel some contracts to clear out contracts in Mission Control Center, we have plenty of reputation to throw at that. So what do we have here? After doing all the upgrades, we did not yet update R&D. We have upgraded the tracking station all the way to level 3, so we've got the full tracking and maneuver tools and all of that. Our launch pad has been updated to this. We're not at unlimited yet, but this is a pretty big vessel. I'm going to hold off on the upgrading the launch pad. Vehicle assembly building has been fully upgraded, so we have custom action groups and any number of parts. Astronaut complex, we don't really need to upgrade that yet, not until we start having to have a lot of Kerbals out on missions. Mission control has been updated. We did that early on. The next upgrade gets us an unlimited number of contracts. I think 7 contracts is enough for now. So we're good. So our next thing I want to do is upgrade R&D. And we're at 548. That leaves us with almost 100,000. I'm going to go ahead and do this. This will allow us to collect surface samples and do research transfers. And it will allow us to do the research that's beyond the 90 research column, in case you want to dip into that. So there we go. And our R&D is fully operational. The next upgrade is at 1.6 million, which allows us to go to raise that 500 science limit to unlimited. So I'm going to save this off and think about how I want to present the code changes. The things I want to look at are go over the inclination change again, just briefly. I don't know, maybe I don't need to do that. The planning of the transfer maneuver. I believe that has application to transferring not just from one orbit to another, but also transferring out to Mon or Minmus. And once we go to Stellar, it'll be once we've left Kerbin's SOI, how do we get to Joule, for instance. So I'll go over that. Then I'll go over the actual hill climbing code that I got from Kevin. And the last bit will be the maneuver execution code, which started out as Kevin's code and got some adjustments to it. And that'll all be happening in a later stream. So see you when I see you.